I'm Mirko Zardini, le directeur du Centre canadien d'architecture. Ce soir, nous avons ici l'architecte Rahul Mehrotra pour une conférence intitulée L'enseignement de Mumbai. This is the second in this series. Perhaps this title of this series reminds you of a book that was published a lot of years ago by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, Learning from Las Vegas. We think that cities, let's call them cities, a kind of standard word, are very important to understand the world around us. And this kind of this series is based on the intention to take these opportunities to learn from different urban situations all over the world today. We had already one lecture, one presentation by Armin Linke. He's a photographer who presented his work on Rome. And we are going to have in the next weeks, 23rd of April, Barbara Penner on the Niagara Falls. Then we are going to have another one in May on Shanghai by Yang Ning Lee. And a last one, end of May, on Los Angeles by Richard Shavu, who is an expert of new media. Now, as in the 60s and 70s, Las Vegas offered students of American universities and a group of students that Venturi and Scott Brown brought to Las Vegas the opportunity to look at American society, urban environment, transformation of these two things from a different point of view. It was a perfect case study. I think that today, Mumbai or Bombay is an incredible opportunity to think of the urban condition, the society, the political condition, the economy in which we live today. You know that statistics are always something very questionable and prediction even more, but some of these projections, they assume that for the 2050, we are going to have 75% of the population of the world living in an urban environment, and most of these people will live in a kind of degraded urban environment. Mumbai has today a population of about 20 million, and I think it will be very interesting to listen tonight from Rahul Mehrotra what could we learn from this kind of situation. Rahul is now teaching at MIT at the architecture department, and he also is working in Mumbai with his office, RMA Architects, which was founded in about, I think, in 1990, something like that. He is a graduate of the School of Architecture at Ahmedabad and also at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. He has helped to found the Bombay Collaborative, which works to conserve historical buildings in Mumbai. Has written also, co-written a lot of books on Mumbai, including Bombay, the cities within, and also edited the first volume of the Michigan debates on urbanism. He's member of the steering committee for the Aga Khan Awards, and also Rahul has kindly served on the jury of the Stirling Prize in 2006 and 2007, which is a joint prize assigned by CCA and the London School of Economics on some contribution on urban issues and critical issues to contemporary things. And I think that when he was on the jury, the selected paper was on the situation in Israel and Palestine, a very interesting paper. He is now, as I told you, associate professor at the School of Architecture and Planning at MIT. And I have to say, last thing, that CCA really would like to thank the generous support of the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute for this lecture. This is the 20th anniversary of CCA this year, of the public opening of CCA. And I think that also is the 40th anniversary for the Shastri, an institution which has been supporting cultural and academic exchange between India and Canada. We hope to continue to work with them on this kind of collaboration. We think that India is a strategic place to look at today for a lot of reasons and for what is concerning to us from an urban point of view. So please join me in welcoming Rahul Mehrotra.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the CCA and the Shastri Institute. It's an honor to be here and part of this series on learning from cities. It's a fascinating thematic format for a lecture series. So I congratulate you all for putting it together. Today what I'm going to share with you is what I'm in the process of learning from Mumbai and what I believe are lessons from a particular condition of Mumbai, which sort of also has some offerings to make in thinking about urbanism generally. Mumbai has been at the center of the visual imagination of most people in the last few months with Slumdog Millionaire. And I must admit, for me, that was really, I mean, it's been very controversial in Mumbai and elsewhere, but for me, it was a really powerful film. Someone who's grown up in Mumbai and knows the city intimately, I had to remind myself that it was not a documentary. It was very real. I think there's no exaggeration. It's absolutely incredible because it really got under the skin of the city and represented the kind of complex relationship between the two very disparate worlds that exist in the city. And I think that's what makes Mumbai very particular. This is an image from it, and I mean, there are many interesting things about the city, but one of the things that struck me as someone who's involved in design and thinking about the form of the city was, well, you know, the film was broken up into two parts. The first half was Hollywood, the second half was Bollywood. There are many, many separations like that. But also what was interesting was the first half, which is through children's eyes, was very much the horizontal plane, the labyrinths of the slums, you know, getting into the city in a particular way. And the second half was about a kind of detachment, about rising above on the vertical plane and imagining and imaginations of the city in completely different ways. And this intersection, a complex one of aspirations, of the disparities that exist in the city, I think was wonderfully captured by this film. And in fact, Mumbai, Bombay, I'm going to use this interchangeably, like several cities in India and perhaps around the world, in this sort of post-industrial scenario has become a critical site for this negotiation between elite and subaltern cultures, which is captured again in this film in incredibly powerful ways. The fragmentation of service and production locations has resulted, like elsewhere, in new bazaar-like urbanism, which has sort of woven its presence through the entire urban landscape in completely interesting ways. This is an urbanism created by those outside the elite domains of the formal modernity of the state, and it's a sort of pirate modernity that slips under the laws of the city simply to survive without any conscious attempt at constructing a counterculture. And I think to recognize that is important. This phenomena is also critical to the city being connected to the global economy because the spaces that it creates have been largely excluded from the cultural discourses on globalization, which usually focus on elite domains of production in the city. And it's not the city of the poor or the regular models of the formal and informal and other such binaries often used to explain cities in developing economies in Asia, but it's a kinetic space, which is what I'm referring to, a space where these models actually of these various binaries have the ability to collapse into singular entities, where meanings are ever shifting and blurring. And it's to this space, the space of the bazaar city, or the kinetic city as I call it, is what I'm going to focus your attention to this evening. Mumbai is a factitious city. It was built through reclamation, 7 islands that were welded together. and now it's become a powerful metropolitan region. It wasn't an indigenous Indian city. It was built by the British expressively for trade and was not expected to become a big town. Instead, it grew incrementally when the need arose. So it really did not have a master plan, as it was never expected to become a large city. This is an image from the port called The Arrival of Goods After the Cold Season. Over time, then, it grew into a global hub for the region. It was settled, it was celebrated, buildings were built, infrastructure at a decibel level to sort of express the power that it represented. In this case, this great colonial sort of gateway to India, and buildings were built self-consciously to celebrate its sort of positioning as a world city within the colonial economy. And you can see from these landscapes the bandstand, the paraphernalia that was a transportation of the British or the European city. But also another world existed, which was and there's a lot of literature on this, colonial literature, so I'm not going to get into this, which was the Indian city or the native town as it was referred to. But these were two spaces that existed in two worlds that existed in two completely different spaces. And of course, over time, they slipped into one diagram, and I think that sort of creates a really interesting condition. It's a topographically challenged city, and so the densities become a big issue. It was an island which has slowly connected itself to the main landmass, and you can just see from that image the kind of density that occurs there. It collects, as you can see there, the emerging centers of growth, economic zones. It's sort of posed to become something completely different. These are all abstract views that I'm sort of sharing with you, which begin to give you a larger sense of what this metropolitan region is, and in a few minutes we'll get down to the ground. It's also got a great setting. This is a view which shows you across these bays that the city is organized around. That's the governor's house, strategically located so that he could count from his veranda while sipping tea the number of ships that went into the port, as in the colonial sort of paradigm. But it's a spectacular setting. But it's explosive in terms of what's happening with the population. And as Mirko said, I mean, it's 20 million. Well, you know, it's interesting in India, and that's why planning is such a problem. We work with margins of 3 million people, which is the size of most cities in North America. And so no one quite knows. So when you even ask a planner in the government how large is Mumbai, they'll say 12 to 15 or 15 to 18. It's sort of in very, very broad terms. And this has to do with problems of mapping and things which we are hopefully correcting soon. So through the 1960s, in the post-independence scenario, waves of distress migration wove these two worlds that I spoke about, blurring them into a kind of singular entity. This, you know, once the colonists left, these diagrams became one. These worlds slipped into the same space. And the post-industrial scenario and the fragmentation of labor have further accelerated this condition. So how then does the idea of a global city play itself out in this condition? What are the resistances the physical environment offers to this process? Here, the physical project of reorganizing a city for globalization begins to take on a completely different time scale and distortions before morphing onto the landscape. And I think this is what's sort of fascinating about what's happening in Mumbai as opposed to China, where the entire country is being made in one image for the global project. The resistances that are built into the processes of democracy and the pluralism of cultural aspirations, as in the Indian case, as well as economies, the changing nature of economies, gives rise to a process by which, in our case, I think globalization becomes very particular. Today, Mumbai and most Indian cities are not the static and stable entities that we've always imagined cities to be. Physical constructs where stable meanings are contained in architecture that then become the spectacle of the city. As you can see in Dubai and all the cities which have been built on the idea of capital, where the memory of the city is encoded and contained in these artifacts. And in the global world, this is even more true. Instead, Bombay, I would describe as a kinetic city, a bazaar city. It's not a city perceived by architecture, but by spaces which sort of hold associative value and supportive lives. Patterns of occupation determine its form and its perception. And again, this has been, documented and written in many other conditions. A book by someone here in the audience, Vikram Bhatt, How the Other Half builds is one that captures other ways of space making. But it's an indigenous urbanism that has a particular logic. And it's not necessarily the city of the poor, as most images might suggest. Rather, I think it's about temporal articulation and occupation of space, which not only creates a richer sensibility of spatial occupation, but also suggests how spatial limits are expanded to include formerly unimagined uses in dense urban conditions. And I think this is an important lesson that Mumbai can offer to the world. The idea of the temporal, the idea of temporal occupation in conditions like this. Also when futures aren't so clear. We seem to build with great permanence for very uncertain futures. And I think that's what cities, I think, have demonstrated. The financial crisis has also showed us how that is not a sustainable model. And so the two worlds here exist in another form. Most images suggest that what I'm referring to is the city of the poor, but what I'm actually referring to is how these two work together. Again, just population comparisons, you see, I mean, the 20 million people, it's all of Australia densified into that space of Mumbai. And I mean, that just to give you a sense of the densities we are talking about and the kind of images that come out of it. If you look at just public space, look at the fragmented nature for populations that are 10 times what might be on Manhattan, the consolidated large urban space doesn't exist, or public space doesn't exist. So you get a kind of paradigm like this, where in Mumbai, for every 1,000 people, it's 0.03 acres. It's 0.03 acres per 1,000 people. And that statistic includes all the traffic islands because they are planted with green, so they've been counted in the statistic. And even then, you have a kind of distortion of this nature. So what does this mean? What it means is that I think the city becomes this sort of grand adjustment, and some really interesting phenomena begin to occur. And again, not the city of the poor. This is something I must remind you about. Here, what you see on these great maidans, as they're called, which are designed for cricket, on this beautiful bay, you see in operation a wedding, which is a highly ostentatious sort of operation. Every society has outlets for ostentation. In India, it's been classically jewelry and weddings. It yet continues to be weddings. In Monsoon Wedding, the film captured that whole phenomena really brilliantly. It's changing. There are now different outlets of ostentation that are emerging for the rich. But the wedding continues to be one. And this is a temporal occupation where on this Maidan, this incredible wedding is put up in a few hours and disappears overnight. And I'm going to run you through a series of images that show you how this happens. So it starts with cricket in the morning at 6 o'clock. They play till about 9 o'clock. Kids go off to school. People move in by about noon, and they start erecting this incredibly complex and incredibly elaborate thing, which is ready by 8 o'clock to receive the bride and the groom. And the wedding takes place with waterfalls, flowers, the whole landscape, video cameras sort of relayed all over the place. And it's amazing. So you basically have this sort of interlocking of, or completely unimagined uses. Now, the cricket pitch is sacred, so it's cordoned off. No one can touch it. The members of the club enjoy high tea. The wedding wraps itself around this space, and you have a backdoor kitchen there. And this goes on till about midnight. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, it disappears, and it's ready for cricket again. And this happens continually. It happens, of course, when they're wedding season, so it's not 365 days of the year. But it's amazing, and I think for me quite interesting, how this sort of occupation begins to play itself out. So, you know, if I have to really explain the way our city works, that's the diagram, the 5 stages of squatting. The guys in the image on the 3rd stage of squatting. So if somebody arrives, they set up a thing, they're unnoticed, they expand, people feel sympathetic, they build a constituency of users, they build support. The summer comes along, they build a shed, everyone empathizes. The monsoon comes along, they fortify it, and then they're part of the landscape. The whole city sort of grows with these sort of incremental moves. And then there's a counter strategy by the rich, which is, this is the gods on the wall. That's the whitest wall in Mumbai, and that's why I documented it, because this building society decided to put the pantheon of gods out on tiles that they screen printed. So there are no squatters, there are no hawkers that come and engage themselves. That suddenly become a sacred wall. And so the rich begin to use the similar sort of strategy. That image is interesting because what you see there, which is decorative, and it actually creates a partitioning, in a sense, for the shop, and creates domain with other little sachets which sell betel nut, they sell shampoo, and that was an invention of Procter Gamble. And Prahlad, who is a professor at the University of Michigan, captures this wonderfully clearly in his book called The Bottom of the Pyramid, where he talks about these markets. And I mean, it was really the realization that incomes couldn't be, a bottle of shampoo would mean someone's 2 monthly income captured in that bottle. And so by breaking it down into these little sachets, they opened up an incredibly large market. But it also, I think, tells us about what the city is about, which is about these many pixels that have great social resolution, which are fragmented, incremental, and they work at a scale which those sort of economies allow. And there's a whole range of this kind of thing that occurs at many, many scales. You can begin to map them as typologies. They are related to the index of security in terms of demolition, because there is there's a celebratory, but there's also a disruptive rhythm that occurs here, which is demolitions, because this is the informal world, and so it doesn't contain legal status and therefore is susceptible. And then there's an economy that sort of works around it, which is an informal economy, you might call it. I'm sorry, it's in euros. I thought it was going to be the stable currency, but I was wrong when I was doing this. And then, of course, you can see that the informal revenue, the revenue from these economies is really large, and some of it finds, 1/3 of it finds its way back to the formal economy through the police force, perhaps. And then, when we talk about resistances to sort of globalization, this is a mapping of McDonald's densities. But what's interesting is that in Mumbai, McDonald's homes delivers. No one goes to a McDonald's, outfit to eat. You order in, and these guys, there are hundreds of these scooters who go around and get you the burger to your house. So it's actually a reversal of the drive-in, which is what McDonald's was sort of founded on. So it's interesting that even to these corporations, these resistances, because they have to adapt to these markets, means a lot. So I think that lesson of that adaptation is an interesting one. So this kinetic city, bazaar-like in its form, can be seen really as the symbolic image of the emerging urban Indian condition. The processions, the weddings, the festivals, the hawkers, street vendors, slum dwellers, all create an ever-transforming streetscape, a city in constant motion, where the very physical fabric is sort of characterized by the kinetic. The conventional static city, on the other hand, depends on architecture for its representation and is no longer the single image of the city, or doesn't even comprise the single dominant image of the city. And it was interesting, Raghubir Singh, who was a well-known photographer, when he did his book on Mumbai, he had a festival on the cover. He didn't represent it through built form or the skyline of the city. And I think a lot of representation of the city in the recent past has been not architectural, as opposed to Dubai or Shanghai, where we look at Pudong, where architecture is clearly the spectacle of the city. In contrast, it is festivals such as Diwali, Dasera, Navratri, Muharram for the Muslims, Durga Puja, and the Ganesh festival that have emerged as the spectacles of the kinetic city. Their presence on the everyday landscape pervades and dominates the popular visual culture of Indian cities. Festivals actually create a forum through which the fantasies of the subalterns are articulated and even sometimes organized into political action. The Ganesh festival is one of the most sort of popular ones and has taken on an incredible dimension, which engages about 5 million people, specific to Mumbai. It occurs in other parts of the country, but in Mumbai it's absolutely spectacular. And the growth has been absolutely phenomenal in the last 2 decades. There are complex reasons for that, but during this festival, which occurs in August or September, numerous neighborhoods transform temporarily with lights and decorations, and entire structures are built. New spaces are created to house the idol of Ganesh for 10 days. During the festival period, families, neighborhoods, and cities mark the celebration through festivity for those 10 days. Films are shown. Entire streets become like cinema halls. And on the last day, a large part of the city's population carries the idol in long processions, ultimately for immersion in the sea. And each procession carries a kind of tableau depicting images of both local as well as global concerns, with Lord Ganesh usually mediating the outcomes. This representation is not based on formal scriptures or predetermined rules. Instead, human ingenuity breaches the boundaries between the local and global, the historic and the contemporary. And there are competitions, film stars are involved, and the scale is absolutely incredible. The processions also vie against each other, so it's a kind of competitive thing. And in the 10 days, there's a whole range. Families who sort of worship smaller idols go and immerse them on the first day, the third day, and then the bigger processions go on the 10th day. And they all chant, inviting Ganesh to resurrect its presence, or his presence, in the following year. And there, as you can see, these are just from newspapers that I sort of took images a few months ago. You can see the extent of the engagement and the scale with which it operates. And it's here you see politicians who actually ride on it, because it becomes a forum for political kind of visibility. But it's absolutely intense in terms of the form that it's taken. And if you just look at the numbers here, they're mind-boggling. There were 157,000 immersions in those 10 days. And the public immersions, like the ones that I'm showing you here, were incredible. They were like 1,500 of those processions that went through the city on that one last day. The whole city closes down, basically. But this is the sort of new spectacle of the city. And immersion becomes a metaphor for the spectacle of the city. And as the clay idol dissolves in the water of the bay, the spectacle comes to a close. There are no static or permanent mechanisms to encode the spectacle. Here, the memory of the city is an enacted process, a temporal moment, as opposed to buildings that contain public memory as static and as permanent entities. The city and its architecture are not synonymous and cannot contain a single meaning. Within the kinetic city, meanings are not stable. Spaces get consumed, reinterpreted, recycled. The kinetic city recycles the static city to create these sort of new spectacles. It actually depends on it, because the setting here is so there's a kind of synergy and there's an appropriation where both these actually blur into something else. This sort of transformative ability of the kinetic city becomes even more vivid in the events that play out in Mumbai's town hall every year on the 15th of August, India's Independence Day. And this is a very interesting phenomenon. This is a grade 1 building. It was the town hall where the British governor would go speak to the subjects once a year. And as in many things in India, including us taking over Lutyens' vice-regal palace for our president, people have referred to it as sort of a phenomenon of Animal Farm. We've also continued this ritual where the Indian governor, who now lives in that governor's house that I showed you in an earlier image, comes and speaks to the citizens, but he decides he speaks now on the 15th of August, which is our Independence Day. And the 15th of August is also when the monsoon is in its greatest fury. So the Public Works Department is charged with this challenge of getting the governor up these 34 steps of the town hall without getting him wet. And of course, if you gave it to the Taj group of hotels or the Oberoi group of hotels, they'd get two really handsome Sikh guys with beautiful turbans with umbrellas, and they'd parade and bugle the guy up. But the Public Works Department has completely different ideas, and that's what they do. They do that every year, and it happens in different forms. It happens incrementally. They first create a passage where the governor, it happens in stages, and it takes on a different form depending who the engineer is and who's in charge of the project. And the conservationists in the city go berserk every year. I mean, there are letters to the editor in the newspapers, people demonstrate, they sort of worry about what's happened to the world, and how can a grade 1 building be subverted like this? But I think it actually is interesting, and I actually support it, because it's a reversible action which touches the building very, very lightly, in fact, extremely lightly, and gets reversed overnight. What happens is this intended image of the symbol of colonial power, a kind of celebrated asset of the static city, is subverted and recolonized by the kinetic city. The Public Works Department unwittingly alters the significance of the building momentarily to expand the margins of the kinetic city. And I think that is an incredible lesson to learn, that you have this appropriation. So if Christo came and wrapped this building, no one would shout. But when the Public Works does this, it's, everyone goes sort of ballistic. And I think this idea takes on a critical dimension when contemplating the preservation of the built environment in these contexts. What is the validity of the conventional notions of preservation, where cultural memory is often an enacted process, as in the kinetic city, or where meanings are fluid, like the kinetic city itself, and often complicated in post-colonial conditions by the fact that the creators and the custodians of these historic environments in the static city are different cultures from those that created them? And I think that is a very important question for us to ask. And here you see the slide which captures this uncomfortable gaze between these two young Indians looking at these incredible British statues. That's King George VII on his black horse, and these are statues that punctuated all the important public spaces in the historic district of Mumbai. And through the 70s, where we had a lot of right-wing reactions, which led to the name changing to Mumbai, against colonial imagery and memory, these statues, about 28 or 29 statues, were removed. And now they actually line the compound of the Bombay Zoo. And they're in a beautiful setting. I mean, they just sort of, there's a metaphorical or symbolic sort of meaning there, but they are, you know, and they're all kind of set up these very uncomfortable conditions. That's Queen Victoria, and this guy's decided to sit at her feet and relax. And these statues were in prime locations in the punctuations within the static city. So that's the black horse that we saw earlier, that's Queen Victoria, but now they've been sort of moved there. And so I think this question where the custodians and the creators of an environment are two different cultures, which is the post-colonial one, conservation has to take on a new meaning to be strategic and to be effective. And that shows you the setting, you know, in this, where architecture is really the spectacle of the city and where these icons were originally set. Or this one, which is the Public Works Department. They decide, I mean, the Public Works Department is really direct when they act, and this is, they had to add an elevator to this building, and so this is what they did. And so this is I mean, you know, it's a very complicated question. I work in conservation a lot in Bombay. It's 50% of my work. And this was, of course, happened 2 or 3 decades ago and really triggered off the whole conservation movement in the city. It's symbolic of it. But it basically tells us that there's a challenge here that we need to address. So then, you know, what is our cultural reading for the kinetic city now, which forms a greater part of our urban reality? And I think here, accepting that cultural significance will evolve or evolves and will facilitate the draining of the symbolic import of the architectural landscape would lead us to a deepening of the ties between architecture and contemporary realities and experiences. And I think this understanding allows architecture and urban typologies then to be transformed through intervention and placed in the service of contemporary life, realities, emerging aspirations. And it's here where the static could embrace the kinetic and be kind of remade by that logic. And the phenomena of these bazaars in these Victorian arcades, the arcade was a mandatory or mandated building element when the historic Fort District was reorganized, which it's now sort of filled with these bazaars. And so these bazaars in Victorian arcades, for me, are in many ways emblematic of the way this folding can occur. And of course, again, here there is a great tension between preservationists and, you know, citizens associations that represent the hawkers about how this can be reconciled. But I think these are the emblems and these contestations is where I think the challenges lie for architects and how one can actually make that sort of work. And I think it's with these sorts of planning components that the city has greater ability to survive. Clearly, the static and kinetic city go beyond these obvious differences to establish a much richer relationship, both spatially and metaphorically, than their physical manifestations would otherwise suggest. Here, affinity and rejection are simultaneously played out in a state of equilibrium, maintained by seemingly irresolvable tensions. The informal economy of the city vividly illustrates the collapsed and intertwined existence of the static and the kinetic city. The train system is something that's a very important part of Mumbai's infrastructure, and because Mumbai is a long sort of island, the train system acts as a kind of spine and makes this very efficient in terms of circulation. So there is no place that's more than 3 kilometers or something like that from a railway station, and so cycling or using a bus or walking is very easy. In Mumbai, only 2% of the population of the city use cars. And so 87 use the train system. So it's an incredible piece of infrastructure. And the dabbawalas, which are literally translated means tiffin men, are an example of this relationship between the formal and informal, the static and the kinetic. The tiffin delivery service, which relies on the train system for transportation, costs about $4 a month, and they basically deliver a hot lunch for you every day. So the tiffin man picks up your tiffin, which is this box, from your house anywhere in the city, and for $4 a month delivers it to your place of work, takes the box, delivers it back. And there are many reasons why this has happened. Of course, the fundamental logic of the way the infrastructure works and the collapsing of the informal and formal is the big idea. But really, it has to do also with the crush factor on the train. So Indians love to have a whole meal, and to carry a box like that on a train where you're kind of squeezed is impossible. That's one. Two is because of questions of hygiene and things, people prefer getting food from, from home. And of course, people live in joint family conditions where there's support systems, where people, can cook. A grandmother lives with you. The joint family structure is very much intact. But it does interesting things, and I think Katzenstein, who is an anthropologist, wrote about this, and she said that one of the things it does is that in places of work where regional identities get subsumed because everyone's dressed in Western clothes, working in a corporate kind of structure, when people go and have lunch and these tiffins arrive, 10 people across the table, suddenly religious and regional identities get reinforced and established through the food they're eating, because there are restrictions on diet on account of religion and other preferences. So there are many interesting things that can be observed from this phenomena. But essentially what happens is it's a complex system, well, simple and yet complex. It marks the zone, the building, the floor. It has to be foolproof. An average box travels about 30 kilometers each way. And it's estimated that about 250,000 boxes are delivered around the city. There are 4,000 people who are employed by this group, which all come from one region in Maharashtra. And its annual turnover amounts to about 50 million rupees, which is about $1 million US. And so I'm just going to run you again through a sequence. This is, someone who'll pick up the lunch. Here a grandmother has probably cooked the meal and ready to go, and they have a relay on these cycles. They begin to start converging to the station. When they converge to a station, another group takes over the dabbas, because now there are many trays of this. There's a dedicated compartment now in the trains for them, and different people who've converged from different places meet. Then they reach the CBD, where a lot of it is delivered, where the group becomes bigger. Then it breaks down into individual groups for buildings. A guy gets into the elevator, sorting it as he's running up, and he gets it to you for lunch. And so it's a sort of neat sequence. This guy is sort of eating alone because he's working through lunch, but usually people eat collectively and share food, so it becomes a phenomenon. So entrepreneurship in the kinetic city is an autonomous and oral process that demonstrates the ability to fold the formal and informal into a symbiotic relationship. The dabbawalas, like several other informal services ranging from banking, money transfer, courier, electronic bazaars, leverage community relationships and networks, and deftly use the static city and its infrastructure beyond its intended margins. These networks create a synergy that depends on mutual integration without the obsession of formalized structure. And so the issue of housing, and this is just the last part of the presentation, most vividly demonstrates the reordering process of the kinetic by the static city. In Mumbai, for example, approximately 60% of the population lives on approximately 10% of the city's land, perhaps even less, in settlements that are locally referred to as slums. It's believed that about 70% of the city's population works in the informal sector. And this number has actually risen with the new liberal economy that curtails bargaining capacity through fragmenting labor in cities. And so it's very interesting that in our post-industrial condition, the train ridership has gone up, although the population has come down. The growth in Mumbai now it's really internal growth. The external population in migration has rapidly gone down. But the ridership on the train has dramatically risen, and that's because of the fragmentation of labor. So you have now service in slums, for example. People are making shirts in slums, and someone else in another slum is doing the buttons, and people are using the train and this infrastructure for that mobility. And so it's an interesting phenomena in terms of how the formal and informal are increasingly becoming actually dependent and morphing into each other. And so, despite its informal nature, this population's productivity allows Mumbai to be competitive on a global scale. And it's really that informal sector that is allowing any form of kind of global connectivity in this sort of broader network. And you can see in that sort of, these are more accurate statistics which show you, that's the population for that much of the population, 84% actually lives on very little land. And of course, housing itself is a big issue. There's a whole range, I'm sorry, that's not very clear, which goes from pavement dwelling to high-rise patterns. And then there's a whole complex web of way transit housing is done. And I can discuss this in the question session if someone's interested, to make a transition between slums and more formal housing. And this is part of the government's sort of remaking Mumbai metaphor. And again, just sort of, they're startling when you start putting numbers together in terms of pricing. And you start, it's really political will and strategy that we failed on, because the economy would allow incredible transitions. And even ownership of land, for example, it's 50% is private, so you could argue that you'd have to have different incentives on it, but the other 50% is all government. So very easy incentives can be built into creating a better housing condition. And you can see from this little slum house, this is a puja or a religious ritual going on, but that one space is used for everything. But you'd see a fridge, you'd see a television, you'd see a kid sort of surfing on the net. But the investment in the house, of course, because of lack of tenure on land, is very minimum. So it's not the economy, it's the failure is really the government's failure to orchestrate the landscape in a way that land gets opened up. Or this image, which is a very powerful one, of this girl who uses the container of water, which is also a contaminant, to go to school. And what you see on those on your right, the white sheds, it's very interesting. Those are actually bootleggers who tap into the pipe because they need the water to make alcohol, and they get demolished periodically, and that's why they're very light. So you begin to start having all sorts of strange things that in this kind of dense conditions that morph onto private infrastructure. And even these statistics on water, you see between the informal, it's 10 times 30 to 300 liters, which is considered to be the normal. But when you juxtapose those dimensions with how much Indians have an obsession about cleaning their cars, every morning if you walk around apartment blocks, you'd have service staff cleaning cars, and especially car tires for some reason. And if you add up all that water, it's really 1.6 million people at 30 liters, which is what the informal sector uses anyway. So there are these sort of incredible imbalances that sort of occur. And I think it heightens the growing contradiction and the islands of sort of increasing concentration of wealth that manifest physically in the gated communities throughout the city and the edge, and especially the suburbia. And the popular metaphorical reference to making Bombay Shanghai, which the politicians use, is emblematic of a kind of one-dimensional imagination that planners and politicians bring to bear on decisions about city development. An obvious extension of the Shanghai metaphor is the notion of remaking the city in a singular image and using architecture as the spectacle to represent a global aspiration. And such global implications also raise political questions that challenge the democratic processes of city governance. And this metaphor is very appealing for the middle class. In a city like Mumbai, for the poor, it's a great city because they're comparing it usually. It's terrible conditions in terms of physical conditions, but in terms of aspirations, it's a great place. And for the rich, it's a great place because they can bypass that system and they can engage with it in many different ways. But for the middle class, which is a bulk of the city's population, and here the definition of middle class we can talk about I believe out of the 20 million people, over 12 or 14 would qualify as middle class, including people who live in slums. And for them, these references to a predictable city, to a city which is stable in its meaning and in its infrastructure, is very appealing. And so these metaphors of Shanghai and architectural spectacles have great currency in the way politicians use them. And so ambiguity regarding the form of Mumbai and its dominant image of the city prompts the question of whose city is it anyway, which is often asked. And this question goes beyond the politics of occupation and challenges the process, obviously, by which the cities make. The making of the city is perhaps most critical when negotiating between the kinetic and the static city, for it's also an effective point of intervention through the city-making process, globalization, and its particular transgressions in the urban landscape are realized. But it's also how the kinetic city can simultaneously resist or participate in globalization as well as reconfigure itself socially, culturally, and spatially that I think is an important question. And this is an interesting image when the World Bank came to Mumbai to, are we okay on time? 5 minutes? Okay, I'll take another 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, I thought that was a sign. Apologies. When the World Bank recently funded a project that's called the MUTP, which is the Mumbai Urban Transportation Project, and one of the big components of the project, recognizing the importance of the infrastructure of the train, was to increase the number of rakes. But they couldn't do it because slums encroached on either side of the train, and you can see the kind of dense condition in which this incredible train system that the whole city depends on runs. And the government had to engage an NGO to do it, and this was a Lakshman cartoon, who is one of India's famous cartoonists, where a bureaucrat is telling the minister that you can't demolish the slums, it'll lead to riots, you have to move the tracks instead. And so politically, that contestation is incredible, but an NGO called Spark actually worked on this, and they managed to relocate the slums in alternate housing. And there are problems with what that new housing is, and that's a whole debate, but the fact that they even managed to create this negotiation, I think, was very important. And so I think these movements of slum associations and networks in Mumbai, I'm just using this as one, there are many that happen at different levels, are emerging as potent sort of potential or potent illustrations of these points of effective intervention that can help blur these differences. And these associations engage with the formal world of the static city while mediating the inherent contradictions of legality, informality, the mobile, temporal strategies of the kinetic city. And the most successful of these movements is the alliance between an NGO, which is called the Society Promotion of Area Resources, SPARK, a CBO, which is a citizen-based organization called the National Slum Dwellers Federation, and the person there is Joachim, who is the president of this association, and the Mahila Milan, an organization of poor women. You see them in that image. This alliance is essentially united on its concerns for securing land and access to urban infrastructure. It has successfully negotiated between the formal and informal worlds in the city and across national boundaries with a network of other alliances working with slum dwellers around the world. So this organization has networks with slum dwellers across all those countries who actually come across help in some of these negotiations because they bring experiences from other conditions. Now, besides representing efforts to reconstitute citizenship in cities, these efforts form what Arjun Appadurai has referred to as deep democracy, and he's written extensively on it. And this idea of deep democracy is interesting. The depth here refers to a model that produces poor communities able to engage in partnerships with more powerful agencies, urban, regional, national, multilateral, and that are concerned with poverty and citizenship. The vertical collaboration and partnerships with more powerful persons and organizations together form a mutually sustaining cycle of this process. This is where depth and laterality become joint circuits along which pro-poor strategies can flow. And it is through the restructuring of city-making processes such as this that the kinetic and static city can be intertwined beyond the physical and their physical kind of constrictions and better engage the inhabitants of the city. So I think this ability and the role that NGOs and CBOs can play in these alliances to not only operate at the grassroots, but have the ability to engage with more powerful agencies, whether it's the government, the World Bank, as in the case of the tracks being expanded, makes for very interesting circuits. And how we set those circuits up as part of the strategy, I think, becomes a very important question. And all of this points to the fact that we have to dissolve the binaries through these strategies, because the binaries don't produce or don't seem to be producing the kind of results that we are all looking for. So the urbanism of Mumbai, just to conclude, represents a fascinating intersection where the kinetic city, a landscape of dystopia and yet a symbol of optimism, challenges the static city encoded in architecture to reposition itself and remake the city as a whole. The kinetic city forces the static city to engage itself in present conditions by dissolving its utopian project to fabricate multiple dialogues with its context. Could this become the basis for a rational discussion about coexistence? Or is the emergent urbanism of Mumbai inherently paradoxical, where the coexistence of the static and kinetic city and their particular states of utopia and dystopia are inevitable? So we are stuck then with a binary. Can the spatial configurations of how this simultaneity occurs actually be formally imagined by us who are professionals in spatial imagination? The kinetic city obviously cannot be seen as a design tool, rather a demand that conceptions of urbanism create and facilitate environments that are versatile and flexible, robust, and ambiguous enough to allow this kinetic quality of the city to flourish. Perhaps the kinetic city might be the tactical approach to take when dealing with urbanism of the temporary, of high densities and intensities. Now, in spite of these many potential disjunctures, I think what this reading that I've tried to share with you of the city does celebrate is the dynamic and pluralistic process that makes the urban Indian landscape. Within this urbanism, the static and the kinetic cities necessarily coexist and blur into an integral entity, even if momentarily, just for that short time. And they create in the process margins for adjustments that their simultaneous existences demand. And this is what I think we can learn from Mumbai. Thank you very much.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Rahul for such an insightful and wonderful talk. Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions.
Are all of the statues that are taken into the water dissolved, or do some of them just get washed and used again?
Well, they dissolve, and I mean, there's a whole debate there about, they were originally made with things that were toxic and stuff, and now there's been a great move to use natural dyes and stuff, but they dissolve. They dissolve over time, they're made out of clay, and they were used with many sort of synthetic dyes for the colors and things, which is now by law being corrected, or has been corrected over the last 4 or 5 years, so that they're natural pigments which can sort of dissolve and not create toxicity in the water. And they also get washed up sometimes when the tide changes, which creates its own problem. So there's a kind of level of pollution that the city is dealing with as a result of the massive expansion of the spectacle. And they're also encouraging people now. They sometimes create artificial ponds in different parts of the city to disaggregate this and encourage people to immerse the idols in those ponds, which are temporarily set up to enable this process. Sorry.
Thank you very much for a nice visit back home. I haven't gone back in 9 years.
9 years?
9 years.
Too long.
Rather than kinetic, I feel that the city has gotten crowded. And the local systems have not kept up. Right. The 2 railway lines which you talk so as if they were a great urbanistic infrastructure, were created more than, they're older than myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is something we have to wake up to. It is not these 2 dualities. And when you lump together the indigenous with the informal, I'm having great difficulties. Dabbawalas are indigenous, not informal. Angadiyas who deliver things and have the transport systems which predates DHLs and international transport for transferring monies are indigenous ways of doing businesses.
Right.
They are not informal. And this is what is causing major problems in this thinking process, I think.
Well, yeah, it's again a matter of definition, and I think, yes, you're right. I try to blur it out of formal and informal. They become informal often. I mean, they are indigenous in their invention, but they become informal when they're defined by the government vis-a-vis tax base, because they're not part of the formal revenues of the city. So I think these are words that need to be. But to go back to your first point, yes, absolutely. The train line was a British intervention, which has been expanded somewhat, but basically as an idea it was. I think the point that and of course there are problems which have to do with governance and many other things. My broader point is one where I've grown up there for 30 years as a student of architecture and then a planner, and frustrated with the idea that there is this sort of notion the city can be so easily remade. And a whole generation of two have gone by where people have lived like that. So I think the argument that I'm really making is maybe we need to not lock ourselves into high investment permanent solutions, because we don't know. Those are acts of maybe pessimism, actually, in the way housing projects are built. But to find solutions that, and that's what I've been looking at in Mumbai, by no means have the answers, and that's why I end with a series of questions. But trying to see how we can accept that a city like Mumbai is not about grand vision, but about grand adjustment, and is that something that we can intervene as people who are trained to make spatial manipulations and contribute to that debate in some way, and therefore recognize what are signs on the emergent landscape that might assist us in doing that. I mean, I think that really is the thrust of what I'm arguing.
Thank you very much. I'm curious to know if your work in Mumbai is being imported into the current discussions for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. The current cycle?
Well, we're going to meet for the first time next month, so I can tell you after that. But I mean, some of these ideas I have been implementing them in conservation work in Mumbai, which of course I didn't show. The intent of this talk was quite different, where we have taken this idea of constructing significance as a mechanism to actually implement some conservation work in the historic district by reinventing the present significance of some of these places and using that as engines to drive the process. And this idea of the creators and custodians being two different cultures, actually articulating that debate. And we've been working in the historic district and actually with some success in some parts, using the strategy to restore buildings, to reappropriate space for new uses, but with the agenda of keeping the architectural illusion of the place intact. Can I just sort of, I just to go back to your question for a second, if I may. You're talking about the Aga Khan. I mean, I think the awards historically has recognized a lot of that. And I mean, all the way going back to their Kampung Improvement Project awards and things. I mean, I think the debate within the Aga Khan Award very much recognizes in Asia these landscapes and encourages ways that they can be dealt with using other strategies than the strategy of just remaking the city. So,
just one question. I've been to Mumbai a number of times, and one of the problems that were mentioned to me is the fact that the slums, very much like you showed on your cartoons there, is really an obstacle to improvements that could be done. In particular, I was told that the subway could not be built in Mumbai for 20 years because of the slums. And do you think that seems to be what you explained to be as being a dialogue now between the slum dwellers and the power that can eventually resolve this issue?
Well, I think that's the only way. I mean, the thing about the subway, that's untrue, because the scheme for the subway it has never been a solid scheme. It's never gone beyond an idea that politicians have thrown around, and now they're doing elevated rail connections, which is those have actually become projects. But yes, the slums are impediences sometimes when overall infrastructure moves, like what I showed you with the trains are involved, but they're often not. I believe that, and again, observing the city, when I started working in the city 20 years ago, I had also great hope in big plans. And I have less hope in them now, and I now very much believe that I think our solutions will lie in a combination of the two, of having some big moves which orchestrate the region, open up land, as was planned in New Bombay in the 60s and 70s, and all of that. But I think it also has to take small moves into account, and it has to, if we accept that we are a democracy, which I think there is no doubt about, we have to find these other processes. We cannot use the metaphors of Shanghai and Singapore, which we've historically done for the last 30, 40 years. It's not going to happen. It's a much more pluralistic kind of landscape with conflicting aspirations. It's a mutinous democracy, not even a regular democracy. And I think that's why I ended with alliances like the ones that I pointed out to. And of course, there's been a lot of critical writing about that alliance also and what it means and things. But I think, I strongly believe those alliances are the ways. And I think it will be often tripartite, or at least tripartite agreements. It's not even just the government, negotiating with the slum dwellers. There's too much of a gap there. And I know advocacy planning as a phenomena which grew in the US as a reaction to urban renewal also gained a bad name. But I think it's models like that we've never had the experience in India with. And I think architects and planners have largely devolved themselves from these debates, which is, I think, a mistake. NGOs are becoming that third space is being occupied by NGOs in very interesting ways. And I think the time is absolutely opportune for architects and planners to step into those engagements. The failure has also been institutions, because institutions can support groups like that economically, because young people have to make a living, and so they decide that's not the way they're going to go. NGOs, of course, support some of them, but I think the profession has to sort of reorganize its. And and in the 70s in Ahmedabad, in many places, there were models of that kind of thing happening. It's just that in the last 20 years, that model has disappeared within the profession completely. And I think it needs to be reinstated. And I think if architects and planners can form parts of these alliances and drop the prima donna kind of leadership role, I think we can be far more effective in remaking our cities. And they will be different cities from what's been made in China.
I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much again,
Thanks
Rahul
again.
Mehrotra, for
Thank you
coming.
very much.
For all of you.